Welcome to class. Our topic today is the structure of the executive branch, the second branch of government created by the Constitution in Article 2, immediately after the first article created the legislative branch. We're going to be looking in this unit at the powers of the president and how the executive branch is organized. And we'll look, of course, also a little bit more in depth in another lecture at the electoral college process and how we select the president. In brief, you have two major parties in this country, the Republicans and the Democrats. Each of them compete to win elections at the national level and the local level. So most recently, in 2012, in the presidential election, you had the Republicans versus the Democrats. Republicans nominated Mitt Romney as president and Paul Ryan as vice president as their nominee. And the Democratic nominees were the incumbents. The incumbent is somebody who already holds the seat. So in 2012, Barack Obama was the incumbent president and Joe Biden was the incumbent vice president. To be elected, you have to travel across the country, and I've drawn a map here, a very rough map that shows the blue and red sections of the country. We'll look in class at actual maps that show state by state the results. Because the way presidential elections work, you have to win a state by state contest. The popular vote, in other words, the person who wins more votes across the whole country, does not determine who becomes president. You have to win the right combination of states in order to be able to reach the magic number of 270 electoral votes. And if you get 270 electoral votes, that will lead you to winning the presidency. Some states are more important in presidential politics than others, either because they have a very large population. California has 55 electoral votes. You take the number of members in the House of Representatives and add the senators, so that gives you the total number of electoral votes a state has. North Carolina has 15. Some states have as few as 3. So the larger your state in population, the more important it is. Also, the more evenly divided your state is between Democrats and Republicans, the more likely candidates are to spend time in your state, because your state might go Republican one year, Democratic another year. That's called being a swing state. And if you're a swing state that goes back and forth between the two parties, the parties are going to spend a lot of time, and candidates will spend a lot of money and time trying to get voters in that state to come over to their side in a particular election. So once elected, the president goes into office and their vice president is elected with them, but they have the task of putting their team together that's going to help them run the country. That team is called the cabinet. This was a tradition started by George Washington, the very first president, where he brought in people to help him run the country after he was elected. The Constitution doesn't say anything about a cabinet, but it's become a tradition. And the first people that George Washington brought into his cabinet were Thomas Jefferson as his Secretary of State, Alexander Hamilton served as his Secretary of the Treasury, and he had a Secretary of War, which we would now consider the Secretary of Defense. So we have 15 different cabinet departments. The Department of State, which deals with foreign policy and how we interact with other countries. We have the Justice Department, which deals with the prosecution of all federal crimes, and also administering the courts. I'm sorry, not administering the courts, but prosecution of federal crimes. The Justice Department investigates civil rights complaints and does all sorts of work making sure that federal law is complied with. Then you have like the Health and Human Services Department, which deals with health care and those sorts of issues. You have the Department of Defense, which covers national security. The Homeland Security Department is the newest cabinet branch. The Homeland Security Department deals with border security as well as dealing with responses to any sort of natural emergencies. So FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, falls under DHS, Department of Homeland Security. And then you have things like the Environmental Protection Agency, also falling under the auspices of the federal government. 15 different cabinet branches, and we'll look more closely in class at those. Once the president has nominated his cabinet members and has gotten them confirmed by the Senate, because they do have to be confirmed by the Senate, just like judicial nominees would, the president can turn his or her mind to domestic policy. Domestic policy refers to anything that happens within our own borders. So policies around economics, policies around environmental practices, those are considered domestic policies because they happen domestically at home. If you think about, a lot of students think about domestic violence. Is there a connection to the word domestic previously? Domestic violence is violence that occurs in the house. So anything domestic is within the United States. That's domestic policy. The other thing the president is responsible for, and Congress has much less to do with foreign policy than it does with domestic policy, the president sets our foreign policy. The president determines how we are going to interact with the rest of the world. The president has the power to negotiate treaties with other countries, whether those treaties have to do with ending a war or some sort of conflict. Maybe the treaty has to do with economic expansion and and trade relationships with other countries. So those treaties are negotiated by the president, but then again they are ratified by the Senate. An example of one way that the president can exercise domestic policy, aside from just signing bills that come from the Congress, would be an executive order. Some things the president can do without Congress getting involved. For example, in the 1950s, President Harry Truman, late 1940s, early 1950s, Harry Truman, I think in 1948, integrated the military, which means that we went from having black units and white units in the military to having some units that were integrated with black and white soldiers serving together. And that did not have to go through Congress. Congress at that time was totally white, very full of white racists who would not have gone along with the idea of an integrated army. So, and that's, again, it's because of the politics of the day and the times that, and the attitudes that most white Southerners especially, but also many white Northerners had at the time. So, because the president is the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, Truman had the authority in determining how to structure the military. And because he was commander-in-chief, he had the power to say, we are going to integrate our armed forces. And Congress had no role in that, because Congress cannot dictate to the president how to command the military. So, those are some tools that the president has and some of the president's focus. We're going to look in our next video at the different roles that the president has. There are 7 specific jobs or roles that the president is responsible for. We'll take a look at those in another video. Have a great day.